Hi everyone, my name is Grace and this is going to be my 2024 reading wrap-up. So today we'll be talking about all the books I read in 2024. I had a really good reading year. I read the most books I've ever read in a year, I think, other than maybe when I was a kid. I read a total of 67 books this year. I was 8 books short of my goal. My original goal of the year was 75, and I could have made that, except I hit a really big reading slump in December and did not pick up a singular book in the month of December. So most of the books I read, I think I own, but I didn't want to like pull out my copies today because I just didn't feel like reshelving, and my bookshelf, you can like kind of see it's like overflowing, and I just didn't want to feel like going through it. Also, I don't own all of the books. Like I think maybe half of them I borrowed from the library, or I did listen to audiobook, or like downloaded on my Kindle, so I don't own all of the books. Hi, editing Grace here. Please ignore the atrocious eye bags I've got rocking. I was watching this footage back and I basically filmed this after working like a 6-hour shift or something. You can tell, and I look like, it's not even the way I look, but it's just like the way I'm acting is like very uninterested, and I like feel bad about that because I don't want it to come across that I like don't care about the books that I've read or anything, like, but I think it's just that I was really exhausted when I filmed this, and it's kind of like coming across as like very indifferent, and I just hate that, but I don't want to refilm the video, so I just want to put that as like a disclaimer. And I think my personality kind of comes across that way as well typically, but I don't mean that. And I did really love like most of the books that I read this year. So yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, disclaim that I felt bad, but also, a couple times throughout the video, I forget to give star ratings. So if that ever happens, they are linked in my story graph if you are so curious and want to know what I gave something. It is all in my story graph. So yeah. That's all I want to say, I think, and I hope you guys enjoy the video. Please excuse my attitude. Very sorry if I come across as rude or anything. So, but yeah, thank you guys. Bye. I'm going to talk about the books I read through category. I'm not going to go like in chronological order just because then I kind of feel like everything would be all out of whack. So I'm going to go based off of category. My categories are romance, fantasy, nonfiction, thriller / horror, and then just like a general fiction / miscellaneous, because there are a couple things that like I wouldn't really consider general fiction, but I don't have enough. Like that was like the only book I read like in a certain category, so I didn't really want to make a whole category for it. Okay, let's go over some reading statistics for the year. So I don't use Goodreads, I use Storygraph, and I really like Storygraph. I've used it since maybe like the end of 2022, the beginning of 2023. 2023 is the first full year of me having it, but I think I started my Storygraph in 2022. I could be wrong though. Yeah, I use Storygraph. I highly recommend you use Storygraph as well. I personally love it. I know that there are other apps, like I know Goodreads is very popular, but I personally don't like Goodreads, and you know, it's kind of like, it's owned by like a huge corporation. I'd rather support something like Storygraph, which is owned by, it's like an independent like small business. I don't actually know if it's still considered a small business because it's gotten a bit bigger now, but I know that it was started by like a Black woman, and I think that that's awesome. So I like supporting Storygraph, and I recommend you do the same. You can follow me and we can be friends. We can check up on each other's reading goals. My profile will be linked in the description. Let's talk about some of my statistics before we get into the actual books. So my reading goal, like I said earlier, was 75 books, and I ended up reading 67, so I was 8 books short, and I read a total of 24,741 pages. My biggest reading month was July. I read 10 books in July, and then my Worst reading month was December. I read 0 books in December because just hit that slump, you know, and it was brutal. My biggest genre was romance. I read 18 romance books, and then my second biggest genre was nonfiction. I read 16 nonfiction books, and then I read 12 fantasy / dystopian books. There's like one dystopian book that I put in that category. Technically my general fiction / like my kind of like catch-all section was 15 books, and I read 6 thrillers / horror novels. There's one horror novel, but I included it there. The longest book I read was Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire with 734 pages. The shortest book I read was Out of the Gate by Elsie Silver with 107 pages. That is like a novella in the Gold Rush Ranch series. It says, according to Storygraph, the book that it took me the least amount of time to read was Heartless by Elsie Silver. I read that in a day. The book that took me the longest to read was A Conjuring of Light by V.E. Schwab, which took me 238 days. I think I technically started that before 2024. I think I started that in like December of 2023. It took me a long time to finish that book. We can talk more about that later. My most read author of 2024 was Elsie Silver. I read 9 Elsie Silver books. And then my second and third place, I guess, is a tie between Jennifer Lynn Barnes and Sarah J. Maas. I read 5 of their books each. My average star rating was 3.91 stars, which is pretty good. I had a total of 8 5-star reads, which is period, honestly. My best month in terms of star rating was June. That month I had an average star rating of 4.75. I don't remember what I read that month that made that so high, but work. My average rating in the month of February was 2.75, which is pretty low. I don't know what I read that month. The month that I read the most was July. As we said earlier, I read 3,214 pages. And then this is cool. I think this is a new feature because I don't remember this last year, but Storygraph has like, it can tell me like the book I read that most other Storygraph users have read, and then the book I read that like most like has like the least amount of traffic, which is kind of cool. So the book that I read that's most in common with other people is, or most shelved is what they say, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. And then the book I read that is the least shelved was I Cried to Dream Again, which is a really beautiful memoir that I'll talk about later and I really love. Okay, so that's kind of all of my data, and now we can talk about the genres that I read. I think I'm gonna start off in the romance section. This is gonna be kind of random, but whatever. So let's start with our girl Elsie Silver. So the first book I read of Elsie Silver and her first series that I read them all in the month of January, was the last 4 books in the Chestnut Spring series. I read Flawless in like December of 2023. I read Heartless, Powerless, Reckless, and Hopeless in the month of January. If you don't know what this series is about, I literally don't know how, because it is one of the most popular romance series ever right now. But it's basically like a cowboy romance. It's set in Canada and it's really good. I mean, I don't know, it's like not just a cowboy romance, because a lot of the guys that we follow, like the male main characters, do also have like other professions. There's one with a hockey player, there's 2 with like rodeo, what are they called? Rodeo cowboys? Yeah, there's 2 with rodeo cowboys, and then there's one with, what's his name? There's one who is in the military. It's not just cowboy romance after cowboy romance after cowboy romance. Like they're a little different, each of them, and I really like that. I really liked this series. Some of them I liked a little bit less. I don't remember what I gave Flawless because that was a long time ago. But Heartless, I gave 4.25 stars. I like this one. I feel like this one's everyone's favorite. Like everyone talks about Heartless and they love it so much. And it was good. I did really like it, but It definitely wasn't my favorite of the series. My favorite of the series was Powerless, which I gave a 4.75. This is the hockey player one, which I don't know, something about that, like, clearly I like hockey romances and I just kind of fall into that little stereotype because I really liked this. And then Reckless, which is also like a really big fan favorite, I gave that one a 3.75. But looking back, I don't know why I gave it, not that that's low, but I feel like I should have given it 4 stars because I remember liking that one. There must have been something that like I didn't like, but that one was good. That one is got like a pregnancy trope. It's a little bit of an age gap romance, but not really. And then I read Hopeless. This one was my least favorite of the series. I don't mind an age gap romance, which is what this one was. This is the one that follows the military brother. I don't mind an age gap romance for the most part, but I just don't like it when like it's like a big deal. Like I didn't like that like her virginity, I don't know if I can say that on YouTube, but her virginity was like a big deal and like losing her innocence was a big deal, and I just didn't like that. Just like makes me feel gross because like if you're gonna do an age gap romance, do it like fine, but like I just don't like that. Also, she was pretty young. I don't remember exactly how young she is, but I want to say she was like 19 or 20. Like she was really young, maybe 21, and then he was like, I think they're like 13 years apart in age. And like the couple in Heartless is also 13 years apart, but she's like 25 and he's like 38, so it's like it's different. And I just don't like that they made her virginity like a big deal. That was Chestnut Springs by Elsie Silver. Then I started the, what's it called? Oh, the Rose Hill series. Yeah, that one came out this year, so that's her newest series. It starts with Wild Love, which I read pretty soon after it came out. I think I read it in June or July. I read it when I was on my trip. We went to Norway and London this summer, and I'm pretty sure I read it like when I was on that trip. I gave that book a 4.5. I loved that book. I loved that book. It was so good. And then I read Wild Eyes. I read this in like October, I think, and I gave that one a 4 stars. I don't remember why it didn't get a 4.5, but it was really good and I really liked it. And I definitely like the Rose Hill series out of all of her series. Like I like that one the most. I like all of them, but that one's the best, and I can't wait for the third one is going to be good. I'm really excited for the third one. I think it's going to be really good. Then I also started the Gold Rush Ranch series, which is not a new series. This is also by Elsie Silver, but it's not a new series. It's actually her first one, but they just re-released them because it got picked up by, I think it's Bloom Books that's the publisher. That series also got picked up by Bloom, so they re-released it with these like really pretty covers. They're like somewhere over there. It's that stack right there. This is also a cowboy romance, also set in Canada. So the Gold Rush Ranch series starts with Off to the Races, which I gave a 3 star. Wasn't my favorite. Didn't really like her writing style. Like you can just tell that Elsie Silver hadn't really found her like groove yet, and I just felt like the characters were a little bit annoying. I didn't really like the 2 main characters, their relationship just kind of like going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and it was just like, will they, won't they, and it just was stupid. I just didn't like it. And then kind of tucked at the back of the first book, there is a prequel novella called Out of the Gate. I gave that a 2 stars. Now it's hard for a novella to like get higher than like a 3.5 just because it's a novella, like what can you really do? But I didn't like this because the age gap made me very uncomfortable because she had known him, like this is about like the grandparents of the people that owned the ranch, and like by the time we're actually reading like the main books in this series, like these characters have already like since passed, and we're reading like about their legacy basically. But I didn't like the age gap because she like knew him when she was like a child, like a young child, and he was much older, and she just like always had a crush on him. And then she goes off to college, like grows up, goes off to college, like comes back, I think this is like one summer, and he's like got a crush on her and is like, oh, she's a woman now. But he's like, oh, she's a woman now, like she's so beautiful, whatever. But then he's like, I can't do this because she was a child when they met. And it's like, yeah, like you were, like she was. But there was also this like underlying thing of like, he always loved her, and he's like remembering her from when she was a kid and how like pretty she was. I didn't like it, and it made me uncomfortable, and it was not my favorite, so I gave it 2 stars. And then I read A Photo Finish by Elsie Silver. Also, this one made me a little uncomfortable just because there were some themes in it that I didn't think were handled the best, and the guy was such an asshole. Like the guy was such an asshole, like awful. So I think it's clear to see that like her series have gotten better as they've gone on, because the Golden Strand series is my least favorite of the 3, and then Chestnut Springs is like good. It's in the middle. I really liked it, but I love the Rose Hill series. So I think she's really found her groove, and I think that she's only ever gotten better, and I really have loved all of her like recent works. So I'm really excited for the next book in the Rose Hill series. I'm interested to see like how many there will be, because there's 4 in the, well, 5 if you include the novella. There's 4 to 5 in the Gold Rush Ranch, and then there's 5 in Chestnut Springs. And I'm curious to see how many there will be in the Rose Hill series. So another cowboy romance series, the 2nd and 3rd book in the, what's it called? Rebel Blue Ranch series, I think it's called, by Lila Sage. The first one is done and dusted. I read that in 2023. I didn't really like that one, but it was like, it was fine. It was just like a really quick read. So I read Swift and Saddled with the girl from the first book, one of her brothers, and then this woman that's kind of like coming in to help with this project. She's an interior designer. It was good. I gave that one 3 stars just because it was like a quick little easy fun romance. A little cheesy. Lila Sage's writing is not my favorite. Like there's nothing super special about it, but like I did enjoy the book. And then I read Lost and Lassoed by Lila Sage. Again, loved this book. It is a 4.5 stars. So you can see that the books have only gotten better in the series, because the first one I think I gave like a 2.5, maybe a 3 stars. Second one I gave it 3 stars, and then the third one I gave 4.5. And I know there's another book coming out. The third one's really good. It's my favorite. It's like enemies to lover. It's again one of the brothers, and then the girl from the first book, her best friend. So I really liked that. I'm sure nothing I'm saying is making any sense, but whatever. Those were like the romance series that I've read. And then I kind of read a bunch of just random romance standalones, or like the starts of series. So I read Love Redesigned by Lauren Asher. I read this towards the beginning of the year. This was my first Lauren Asher book and my only one thus far. I gave it a 3.5. It was fine. Childhood friends / rivals to lovers, because they were childhood friends, but they like, and then they like stopped getting along type of thing when they got to high school. I honestly don't remember much of this book. I just remember that the main girl like really irritated me. I gave it a 3.5, but that's honestly a generous rating for it. I'm not like super eager to pick up the next book, but it is like on my radar, like I may. I also read Picking Daisies on Sunday. This one's really cool. This one is like a independent like indie book, and it's really cute. It's an adult romance, but there's not like any smut, which I like. So like adult romance, I just mean that they are adults. Like I like smut, like I enjoy reading smut, but sometimes I don't want to, but I also don't want to read about teenagers. So I want to read like adults, but I just don't want to read smut. And I thought this was really nice because they were like college age, like they were like seniors in college, but they like also like it wasn't about like hooking up, like, and it was childhood friends that had like grown apart and then come back together. It was so cute. I love this book so much. She has another one out now. I can't think of what it's called, but I do want to read it. So then I read Him, Elle Kennedy and Serena Bowen. This is a men loving men romance, which is great. I only read this because I think I've mentioned this before, but my friend Luke and I, over the summer, we were doing this like book exchange where every month we would give each other 3 books that we had to read. and we like couldn't really say no, and this was payback because I made him read Icebreaker, so he made me read this, which is a gay hockey romance. And nothing wrong with that, like nothing wrong with gay romance, obviously, but I just didn't love it because there was a lot of, like, in my opinion, there was some biphobia. It was just like really icky. It's like a little bit of like, I don't know if it's sexism, but I just didn't like it, where they were just like talking about like how hot they were and like, yeah, we're so hot and like all the girls hit on us, but little do they know like we're gay. But it's like a lot of the book is like them talking about like how like women are just like falling over them, which I just don't like I just do not enjoy that. And you can just tell that this book was like written in 2015. You know what I'm saying? I've never read any Elle Kennedy or Serena Bowen books before. I think it's the Off Campus series. I have it, but I haven't read it. I want to, but then this book like made me scared because I just did not like the writing. I didn't love that book. I gave it a 3 stars, but it's fine. It was karma for making Luke read Icebreaker. So then I read The Godparent Trap by Rachel Van Dyke, and this was on my physical TBR for I think like 2 years. I don't remember why I bought this, but I did, and I read it finally this year. I just picked it up randomly, and it was a 2 stars. The reason that I was interested in this book in the first place is because I like the movie that it's like loosely based off of. I can't think of what it's called, but it's the one with Katherine Heigl. I'll insert a picture. Basically, this is about 2 people who do not get along. They are enemies. They don't like each other, but they're in each other's lives because of their mutual friends. So like the girl's best friend is the sister of the guy in this book, and her husband, the couple that already exists, they pass away. I believe they get into a car accident, and they had 2 kids, so which is the guy's niece and nephew, and then the girl, she is like their godparent because she's the best friend. They pass away, and then the 2 of them are like the legal guardians of these kids now, so they just kind of have to like get along. So it's like forced proximity, and they have to live together. They're like living in this house and taking care of these children, and then they fall in love. That's the premise of the story. It's the exact plot of the Katherine Heigl movie, literally the exact plot, except that I don't think the guy's the brother. They're just like mutual friends, and they're both like godparents, and it's only 1 kid and it's a baby. Now that all sounds great. However, I was reading this book, and then I was like all these events had happened, and then it said like, yeah, and they had only died like 5 days ago, and it was like they were already living in the house. At one point I think they like sleep in the master bedroom, and then the kids are older. They're like 5 and 7, or like 7 and 9. Like they like know what's happening. They're not babies, so like they're aware that their parents have passed, and they start like taking them to school again like really soon. Like, we just need to like start having a normal life. And then they're doing like all these like rom-com-y things, and it's just like I feel like it's bad because they didn't even like grieve. There's no part of the book where they really showed much of like the grieving process really, and like talked about like helping like the kids through it and helping each other through it. Like it like immediately jumped into like sex and smut, and like I said, I don't mind smut, but I just felt like in the context of the story, like it didn't make sense. It didn't serve the story, and it was stupid. And I would have rather had like a sweet romance that also has heavy topics of grief, and like talking about this story and this journey that they're on, and this like found family that they have to create to like get through it together. But they really had none of that. Literally, I'm not joking, this is all going to contain spoilers because I just don't care. I don't recommend you read this book. But literally at one point, like the kids are like in the living room, and the couple, they go into like the bathroom that's connected to the living room and have sex in the bathroom. And then also at one point they're like going through the couple, like the original couple, the deceased couple, their things like in the master bedroom, because they're trying to like get rid of stuff like 2 or 3 weeks after they've died, which is 1, insane. and they like find a box of like sex toys, and it was just weird. Like, it was so weird, and they were like, ew, that's so gross, like, but like, ha ha ha, like, that's so them. Like, the very end, like the last 20 pages of this book is like the girl gets into this like huge car wreck, and then she like gets taken to the hospital, and she like wakes up with amnesia, and the guy's like, no, like, you have to remember, like, remember this, like, our friends died, my sister died, your best friend, and we're raising these kids, and like, I love you, and blah blah blah. And she's like, I remember, oh my gosh, it's a miracle, I remember you. Sorry, that was me having a stroke, because what are you talking about? Moving on. Then I read Red, White, and Royal Blue. This took me years. I've owned this book since 2021. Never read it, and I finally read it because Luke forced me to, because it was one of the books that he made me read, and I gave it a 5 stars. I'm not going to explain what this one's about because I feel like everyone has read this but me. Well, I guess I have now, but I feel like you already know what this is about, so I'm not gonna explain it, but it's very good, and I gave it a 5 stars, and I really loved it. Then I read Daydream by Hannah Grace, which I also gave a 5 stars. I read Icebreaker in like 2022. I was a little late to the game, but I read it and I loved it, and at the time I gave it a 5 stars. I probably would not give that book a 5 stars at the time, but it was one of the first romance books I read, because up until like a year and a half ago, I didn't read romance or fantasy. Like, I only read nonfiction and literary fiction. Yeah, I'm better than you, like, don't worry about it, don't sweat, but I am superior because I did only read nonfiction and fiction. I'm just kidding, I never thought like that, but I just, like, romance and other genres like didn't really interest me at the time. Icebreaker was like one of my first introductory romance books, so I just like loved it because of that, and I had never read anything better up until that point. So I gave it 5 stars, and if I reread it, I definitely wouldn't give it 5 stars, but I don't want to reread it, so I'm not going to. Wildfire I didn't really like. I think I gave it like I mean, I liked it, but I didn't like it as much. But I think I gave it like a 4 stars still. I read that a while ago, like right when it came out. And then Daydream, I gave it 5 stars. This is my favorite in the series. I don't care what anyone says. I liked that it didn't have that much smut, and there was yearning, and I really related to both the characters. If you don't know what this series is, it's the Maple Hills series, and it's interconnected standalones. The first one is like one of the most famous hockey romances ever, Icebreaker, and then the second one also follows a hockey player, but it takes place like in the summertime. Like they're like camp counselors, so it has like really nothing to do with hockey other than the fact that he is a hockey player and we just know him from the first book. And then this one, he is also a hockey player, but it doesn't really have that much to do with it. Like, I don't really remember them talking about hockey that much. I just know that he is a hockey player, obviously. I'm really curious as to if the series is being continued. This one follows Henry and Hallie. Her name's Hallie. Henry is also a hockey player. They never give him a diagnosis of anything, but it's like commonly believed that he either has like ADHD or autism, just because he has a lot of neurodivergent tendencies. I myself have ADHD, and I see a lot of myself in him, but I think the beauty of it is that other people with other diagnoses or lack thereof also relate to him. So it's like, that's why I think Hannah didn't diagnose him with anything, which I think is great. So Hallie, I also see a lot of myself on her, because she is like people pleaser, trying to make everyone happy. She, like, her love language is doing acts of service for people and like gift giving, and she's the oldest sister, so she's kind of got like first daughter syndrome, and I relate to a lot of that as well. So I related to both of them in different levels, and I just thought that they had a great way of communicating. I really liked their romance. I liked their friendship that they had first, which I think is great. And yeah, I just really liked it. And the last romance book I read was Don't Want You Like a Best Friend. This was another book that Luke made me read. This is a sapphic romance, which I really loved. And it takes place in the Regency era. So it's kind of like sapphic Bridgerton, I guess. They're like going to these I think they're called debutante like parties and balls, and they're trying to like find partners, and these girls end up kind of falling in love with each other. They're forming a friendship, and they fall in love with each other, and it's really good. They also have like kind of like a subplot romance where they're also trying to get their parents to fall in love, which is really sweet too. And I really liked it. I thought it was great. I listened to half of it on audio, and the audiobook was great too. And I gave it a 4 stars. Okay, moving on to fantasy books. The two that are kind of like on their own is I read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I read this in I think June, because I think I also read this on my trip. 5 stars. Loved this book. I'm a huge Hunger Games girl. Hunger Games is one of the series that like really got me into reading, and I love this series. I really want to reread the first 3 books before the next one comes out, because trust, I will be reading that. I will be reading that. Ooh, I'm very excited. Very excited for that book. So yeah, read that book, loved it. 10 out of 10, 5 stars, one of my favorite books of the year. I also read A Conjuring of Light. I kind of mentioned this earlier. This was the book that like took me the longest to read this year. If you don't know, this is part of the Darker Shades of Magic. This is, well, it was the conclusion of like the original trilogy. Now I think that there's more books, but I don't know if they're like prequel books or if it's a separate series like attached to it, or if it is in this series. I'm not really sure, but I know that there are other books like in this universe now. But at the time of when I bought these books like 2 years ago, or they were gifted to me for my birthday, it was like its own trilogy. Darker Shades of Magic, A Gathering of Shadows, and then A Conjuring of Light. I read the first 2 back in 2023. I read A Darker Shade of Magic, and I gave that, I don't remember what I gave it, but I know that I really liked that one, and I kind of like flew through that book. And then Gathering of Shadows was a little bit slower for me personally. I didn't really love it. It felt like it felt like really intense in terms of like world building and just like complex fantasy. And this was like, also mind you, Dark Shade of Magic was my first ever like fantasy series other than like reading Harry Potter when I was a kid. So, and that I think is like just a heavy start to fantasy personally. I'm just not like, I don't have the brain power to do like a lot of heavy world building, so I don't really know why I thought that would be a good start for me. And then this book just took me forever to read. It just really like, I had to listen to it on audio, a lot of it. It's not bad, like it's really well written, and like the world building is like incredible, but it's just really dense, and just for me personally, like I just think it's not the series for me. I ended up giving this one a 3.5, but I don't think that's a fair rating, just because like I personally don't connect to it. And I also have found that I like a little bit of romance in my fantasy series, and this really doesn't have. So the first fantasy book of the year technically that I read was Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, which I gave a 4.25. I hadn't read this, like I was technically late to the game because I read this right before Iron Flame came out, and I think it had already been out for like almost a year by the time I read it. I gave it a 4.25. I really liked it. Like it was like a stupid, fun fantasy, and I thought it was like not the best written, but it was fun, like, and it was fast paced, and I enjoyed it. Like I had a good time. Is it like a work of art? Absolutely not. And it is a ripoff of a lot of other series that I've read and loved. But it's like it was entertaining. Then I read Iron Flame, and I hated Iron Flame. I gave it a 2 stars. I just thought Xaden and Violet were so annoying, and they were just having the same argument over and over, and there was a lot of back and forth. The sex scenes were unnecessary. I thought the sex scenes were stupid. I didn't like the plot twist at the end. And then also this was like around the time where a lot of controversy about Rebecca Yarros was coming out. So I gave the Iron Flame a 2 stars. I don't know if I'm going to continue the series. I am curious about what's the next one? Onyx Storm. I'm curious about it, but I don't know if I'm going to like rush to read it. Then I also have been slowly working on a reread of the Harry Potter series. I didn't give these a star rating because I'm really just reading based off nostalgia, and also it's just hard to give these a star rating just because like I love them because nostalgia, and like I'm like fully in my Harry Potter like phase right now. Like I've been rewatching the movies as well, but it's also hard for me to like give them a good rating because I also know like a lot of the book and like characters like rooted in racist rhetoric. Obviously J.K. Rowling is not a great person, so I just read these like purely for nostalgia purposes, so I didn't rate them. But I read Chamber of Secrets, Prisoner of Azkaban, and Goblet of Fire. I read the first one back in 2023, and then I'll probably read the next 3 sometime this upcoming year. But yeah, this was fun. I read them with my boyfriend, and we just kind of like slowly started rereading them. So yeah, I dove into the Throne of Glass series. I read ACOTAR back in 2023. I liked it a lot, and so I decided I would head into Throne of Glass. So I read Throne of Glass, gave it a 3.5. You could definitely tell that this was her first ever book. Lots of exclamation points. Very like juvenile writing, and not my favorite, but I read it. And then I read Crown of Midnight, also just like kind of juvenile writing. Like I just didn't really love it. I felt like I was reading off of Wattpad, and I gave that one a 3.5 as well. Those books did entertain me, but they just like weren't the best. Like I was like, I want more. Like I feel like I don't want to be reading something like this, you know what I'm saying? Then I read The Assassin's Blade. Now I technically like I finished it third, but I actually read this in a weird order. I know there's a lot of controversy of when you're supposed to read Assassin's Blade. Some people say you're supposed to read it first, some people say you're supposed to read it third. I actually read it in a different order. So Assassin's Blade is 5 novellas. I read the first novella, and then I read Throne of Glass. Then I read the next 2 novellas, and then read Crown of Midnight. And then I read the next 2, the last 2, and then I moved on to Heir of Fire. So I read it a little bit out of order, but I gave Assassin's Blade a 4 stars. I just really liked her writing style more in this. I could kind of tell that she had kind of like figured her style out, and it just felt like a little bit more mature, and I think that made me feel good about it. Obviously, like I knew what happened. I mean, I didn't know like all of the novellas, but like the main one, like the last one, like I knew what happened in that, so it wasn't a shock for me personally, but it was good. Then I moved on to Heir of Fire, and I gave that a 4.25. It took me a while to read and get into, but I really liked it. I liked finally meeting some more characters, and yeah, I like that one a lot. That one was really good. Then I read Queen of Shadows, and that was a 5-star read for me. It was so good. It was just like, I literally like I was reading it and I was like, yeah, this is good, this is really good. And then the end, I like bawled. This was the book that actually made me like understand like Manon and why she was in the series, because reading Heir of Fire, like part of why it took me a while to get into Heir of Fire was like so many different perspectives that I just like didn't care about. Like I didn't care about Manon's perspective literally the whole time, and like her point of view, I just did not like. I didn't care. It's like, why is she here? We don't know who this is. Like she has not been relevant this entire time. And then Queen of Shadows, like you can like see that it really starts to connect, and I stopped at the end. So loving that. Moving on to nonfiction. Okay, popping back in to say that I forgot to mention that I don't typically rate nonfiction books. I think I do mention it later on in this section, but just at the forefront, like I forgot to say that I don't really rate nonfiction. I don't give it a star rating. So yeah, I just forgot to mention that. So, but that's all I want to say. Okay, bye. So the first book I ever read this year, I actually think I started this in December, and I think I literally finished it like January 1st, so I kind of cheated, but whatever. Finding Me by Viola Davis. This is Viola Davis's memoir, and it was really good. I got my friend Luke to read it, and then he's gotten like a couple other people to read it. It's really good. Obviously everyone knows Viola Davis, like she's so amazing, but to like hear her story was just like, it was just really powerful. And I especially like recommend, like, if you are an actor, to read this. I don't know how much I've talked about this, but I'm an actor and that's what I'm like trying to do with my life, really. And so I like reading memoirs by actors because a lot of times they talk about their experience and, you know, them going to school, getting into school, like rejections they've experienced, how they got into the business and all that stuff. And I really like reading it. I recommend anyone reading it, but especially if you're like trying to go into like the film or television industry or like into theater, like I really recommend. Then I read my favorite book of the year. My favorite book of the year was Know My Name by Chanel Miller. I read this in January. It was one of the first books I read and it changed my life, and it's my favorite book of all time now. If you don't know, Chanel Miller is a woman who was raped by Brock Turner at Stanford back in 2015. I think it's been like 10 years now. I think it actually has just turned into like 10 years. I think in January, it'll, like this month, it'll be 10 years since she was assaulted. And up until this book released, she was actually anonymous. So she did her court case and she like lived her life anonymously. And this book just really, like, it was her reclaiming her name and her story and finally telling it and like telling the whole story from her perspective. And it is so hard to read, but it is, I think, the most beautiful book I have ever read. And just her, like, I could get emotional talking about it because just her story is so, I mean, her life is just like so incredible, and just the way that she talks about not only like the assault and what she experienced, but also like her childhood, and just like her writing is so gorgeous. It is so stunning, and I recommend anybody reading this. It's obviously very triggering, but it's so good. I recommend reading this if you have experienced sexual assault, if you know someone who has and you're trying to better understand it. I think this would be an amazing book to read. If you know someone who's been accused of assault and you're having a hard time believing it, I recommend reading this book. If you have a hard time believing women, I recommend you read this book. Like, please, if there's any book I could ever recommend reading, it is this book. It is so amazing. I don't usually give nonfiction books a star rating, but this, like, I have to say it's a 5-star read for me because it's actually like a 1,000,000-star read. It is incredible. It's so good. So please read this book. I read Dear Dolly by Dolly Alderton. Dolly Alderton is who wrote Everything I Know About Love, which I read a couple years ago, and I loved that book. It's one of my favorites. I really enjoyed it. She also has a column in a magazine or a newspaper in London, and this book is basically her answering questions. So people are allowed to send in questions and asking for advice in certain situations in her life, and this book is a kind of a collection of people writing letters into her and what her advice or response is, and it's really good. There's some things, like, I really like her writing because I like that some of it's really funny and then yet some of it's really serious and like touching, and I really enjoyed it. So highly recommend. Then I read another memoir, The Sound of Gravel by Ruth Warner. So this is about Ruth's life growing up in a religious cult, and this is also a very tough read, I would say. And it's one of those things where I was kind of like, what is the like moral of this story? Like, it's not so much of like, is there like a lesson, but it's really just like her telling her story. And I think there's something like really cathartic about it, and just like being like, damn. It's obviously really like hard to read. I listened to it on audiobook, and it was really good. I really recommend this book. I thought it was great. I read it towards the beginning of the year, so honestly I don't remember that much, but I do remember that it was really good, and I remember really liking it, and it's pretty short too. I didn't think it was like, you know, super long. So then I read Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. This was an amazing memoir. I really loved it and I highly recommend it. This is about Michelle's experience with watching her mom go through cancer, and watching her mom pass and kind of dealing with the trauma of like not only losing a loved one, but losing a loved one in a way that is so traumatic and hard to watch. And then it also is kind of showing her life through like the lens of an Asian American woman. Michelle's daughter also has a band. She also makes music. And I've never listened to it, but I really should, because I mean this memoir is good. If her music's half as good as her memoir is, it's great. I really liked that and I would recommend it. I thought it was really beautiful. Then I read The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. Obviously this is Britney Spears' memoir. It's also really good. It's not my favorite like celebrity memoir by any means, but I do think it's really cool to like get her story, and she does talk a lot about, you know, her family and just kind of her life as a child star and how that really changed her family dynamic, and then her relationships with other people. It talks about Justin Timberlake. It talks about her kids and losing her kids and love that she's experienced and the lack of love she's experienced in some other cases. It's really good. I really recommend it. It talks a lot about how fame has impacted her and how it affected her, especially at such a young age. I would recommend it, but it's definitely not my favorite celebrity memoir by any means, but it is good. Then I read Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing by Matthew Perry. This is a good book, but it's really sad to read now that he has passed away. The book like literally opens with him being like, consider this my message beyond the grave because I am not supposed to be alive, and then like reading that, like knowing that he is unfortunately passed, is really hard. But I think that it's a great book talking about like his addiction and his struggles with addiction, and it obviously talks about friends, but it doesn't actually talk about friends like that much, but it's really good. Then I read Hood Feminism by Mickey Kendall. This is a really great book and I would really recommend it. It talks about feminism obviously, but through the lens of a Black woman, and talking about how feminism isn't feminism if it's white feminism, and it's not feminism if it's not like intersectional feminism. The issues that might impact me also impact other people, but in different ways and worse ways. And just because it's impacting me doesn't mean that like I'm experiencing it the worst. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's really good. Then I read Down the Drain by Julia Fox. If you don't know, Julia Fox she's most famous for being in Uncut Gems, and she had that meme where she's like, I was John Zappi's man when he were Uncut Gems. That is her. That is Julia Fox. She also was engaged or dating. I think she was just dating Kanye West. And I think that is a lot of how she got like very famous, was from dating Kanye West. But obviously she's a lot more than that. She's also a mother. She's into fashion. She has modeled. Like she also like owns businesses. She's an incredible woman. And her story is literally insane. Like I was listening to the audiobook, and then all of a sudden she's talking about like snorting coke out of the carpet fibers. Like she had like a crazy life, but it's really good. And I think she has such an interesting life, and some of the things that have happened to her is just insane. And the amount that she's done and seen, both good and bad, in her short, like, I mean she's really young, so the fact that she's like seen that much and done that much and like experienced that much life at a young age is really just incredible and interesting. And I think she's a great writer. I think the book is really well written, really good. So I listened to this one on audio book as well. I really like to listen to memoirs on audio, especially when the authors narrate it themselves, and you just kind of like hear the emotion in their voice, and you can hear exactly how they want their lines and their book to come across. And I really like that. So then I read What My Mother and I Don't Talk About. Now this is interesting. This is a collection of essays by a bunch of different authors, and it's about like their relationship with their mother. Some of them are sad, some of them are happy, some of them are kind of a mix in between, bittersweet. And it was interesting because like some of these I did not connect to and did not relate to at all, but some of them I really did. So it's kind of hit or miss. Like it's hard to say like whether or not I really recommend this book, just because the essays are so different. I also personally, like, I don't have a super complicated relationship with my mother. I'm very blessed that I have like a good relationship with my mom, which is probably why I didn't connect to this story as much as other people might. If you do have a complicated relationship with your mom, that this might be a great book for you, but it wasn't the best book for me just because I couldn't connect to it as much as I would have liked to. Then I read I Cried to Dream Again. This is by Sarah Cruzan and Corey Thomas. Sarah Cruzan she was arrested and sentenced to prison for a long time. I don't remember if she was sentenced to life in prison or if she was sentenced to just like a lot of years, but she was sentenced to prison because she murdered her pimp. She was forced into sex trafficking at a very, very young age, and she ended up killing her pimp, who was also an abuser, was sexually abusing her from a very young age. And it talks about not only like sex trafficking and like her story, but also talks about like the justice system, how corrupt the justice system is, and obviously like it failed her. She should not have been in the position that she was by any means. But it talks about her life and, you know, what it's like to be sentenced to life in prison when you're a teenager, because I think she was like 17 years old. I don't really know what to say other than that because I don't want to reveal too much. If you are planning on reading it, I really recommend it. I feel like this is a really underrated book that not a lot of people are talking about, but it's really, really good. Then I read Love, Pamela by Pamela Anderson. Now obviously this is Pamela Anderson's memoir, and she has made like such a comeback in the last 2 years. She has her movie out right now, and she's just like been doing all these things. This memoir is not my favorite memoir ever, but I do really like it, and I think that her life is really fascinating, and just how she was really like one of the first like overnight like instant fames, pre-social media, when you could just like go viral on TikTok and stuff. But she just like blew up and was just like instantly famous and was an instant like sex symbol, and just how much that can like affect someone, and her story and what she really wants to do with her life, and how she's so much more than just like being beautiful and being attractive. Interesting to see like what she's doing now. I guess I found that to be the most interesting part, and you know, her talking about her life like post, you know, Playboy and stuff like that. So I thought it was really cool. I definitely would recommend reading it now, especially with, you know, the comeback that she's having right now. But I wouldn't say it's my favorite celebrity memoir, but I would recommend it, especially if you are a Pamela fan. Then I read Page Boy by Elliot Page. This was another book that Luke had me read, and I'm so glad he did because I absolutely loved this book. If you don't know, Elliot Page is famous for Umbrella Academy, Juno, X-Men. He's been in a lot. This is like about his life, and you know, obviously the fame that he's experienced, but also like discovering that he was queer, and then discovering he was trans, and how he never felt like he really was living his truth and like living up to who he was, especially like with added pressure like being in Hollywood. And he was kind of like in Hollywood when it was not cool to be gay, and it was not cool to be queer, and definitely not cool to be trans. He was kind of one of the first, in my opinion, like from my perspective, just like kind of growing up at around that time, of like being one of the first really big celebrities to come out and to be openly gay, and definitely one of the first celebrities to be openly trans. The one thing I will say that I didn't love about this book was it jumped timelines a lot. So it would like be one chapter talking about when he was a kid, and one chapter talking about Umbrella Academy, and then it'd go back to Juno, and then it would go to like before Juno and when he was in high school, and then it would talk about this and this and this and this and this. And that was a little bit confusing, especially because I was listening to this on audiobook and I was like on a plane, and I was just like kind of whiplash. But it is also like a cool way to do a memoir too, so you know, can't complain too much. Another thing that annoys me, not just with this, but with like other celebrity memoirs too, but especially in Elliot's, they will spill tea on other celebrities, but they won't say who it is. There's this whole story, which I won't say too much if you're gonna read it, but there's this whole story in this book where he's talking about how what he says is that an incredibly famous A-list celebrity like said and did this like horrible, like fucked up shit to him, and it was so like really homophobic, really horrible, awful. And then the next day was like, I'm sorry, I was like really drunk, but you know I didn't mean any of that, right? And he didn't say who it was, but I want to know so badly who it was. I want to know who that was so badly. And it's the one thing I hate about memoirs, especially celebrity memoirs, is they will not say who it was, and it pisses me off. I get it, I respect it, but it just annoys me because I want to know who they're talking about. Like, I want to know who the celebrity is because I want to know never to support them. Moving on. Then I read I'm Still Here by Austin Channing Brown. This is also a book about this woman's experience as a Black woman in America. Specifically, I thought the interesting thing about this one was that she was talking about her experience in as a religious Black woman in America, because she actually works for, I don't quite remember, but it was like different like religious like nonprofits, and she talks a lot about her faith. She also talks about how not only is she a Black woman in America, but her name, Austin Channing Brown, like she was like, not only does it sound like a man's name, but it sounds like a white man's name. And she talks about how like her parents did that like on purpose to give her more job opportunities. But she talks about like how when people meet her, like especially in like business settings or like with her nonprofit work and all that stuff, they show up and they're expecting a white man named Austin, and she's like, oh no, that's me. And they're like, and how a lot of times that makes people like their like racist biases show. But there was a lot in this book that she talked about. It was really short too. It was like a really quick read. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. It was really good. I read it in like one sitting. It was really quick. Then I read Loud by Drew Afwalo. I liked this a lot. I was a little bit hesitant when I read this just because she's so young, and I thought it was like a memoir at first. And one, I always kind of think it's a red flag when like influencers release books, because like we saw that a bunch in like 2010s like YouTube era when all these YouTubers were releasing these books and they were bad. So I always get a little bit hesitant when an influencer of some kind releases a book, because I'm like, what are you talking about? And is this just a money grab? Like, I don't understand. And then I was a little, you know, hesitant knowing that it was like a memoir style book, just because she's so young. It's like, what can she really talk about? But I did like this book a lot, and it wasn't really a memoir. It was mostly like just different. It was about like feminism and her experience with feminism, her experience with racism. I thought it was really empowering. There was a lot in the book that I thought was great, and I would definitely recommend it. Yeah, and I love Drew. I think she's so funny, and a lot of her book was like really funny, and like her humor was really coming through, but it was also serious as well. Then I finally finished The Body Keeps the Score. This book I've been reading on and off since like 2021. It is such a difficult read. If you don't know what this book is, this is a nonfiction book that is about PTSD and the way that trauma affects our bodies and our brains, but how even when our brains like don't remember trauma and like block it out, our bodies still remember it, and our bodies still have reactions to things and hold on to these memories. And it talks about PTSD in relation to a lot of different things. It talks about PTSD in abuse, child abuse, assaults, witnessing violence, the PTSD that veterans experience, PTSD of people who have been involved in natural disasters or things like school shootings and bombings and war and car accidents and like plane crashes and all these different like horrible traumatic events. So it's really good, but it's really heavy. As someone who I have PTSD, I was diagnosed with PTSD when I was 13. It's a really difficult read. I wouldn't recommend it if you think it's gonna trigger you, which is why it took me so long to read it, because it would. But it is good. It's just really dense and heavy, and it's a lot of information, and I would say it's one of those books that you kind of like have to pick up every once in a while and then finish it slowly, like read a chapter or two and then put it down. It's definitely not a book that you can just like binge read. Not for me, personally, that's just not what it was for me. And I would recommend it too if you're someone, like a loved one of someone who's going through PTSD. I think that it could be beneficial to you and helpful if you have a partner or a child or a parent or friend who's going through a trauma that you think could lead to PTSD. I would recommend it in those instances, but I would do a lot of research first. I wouldn't just go into this blind. Moving on to thriller and horror. This was a small section because I just really dipped my toe into thrillers this year. I read the Housemaid trilogy, so this I feel like I don't need to explain because it's so famous, but if you don't know, it follows a maid who gets a job in this like house and there's just some shady shit going on, and that's really all I can say without spoiling it, but I think that it's also really famous. So the first Housemaid I gave 5 stars. I really loved it. Like I literally read it in one sitting, and I've gotten like 3 other loved ones to read it because I just think it's so good. Housemaid's Watching I gave 4 stars. Didn't love that one, not my favorite. Housemaid's Watching, I hated and I gave it 2 stars. So bad, awful, didn't love it. The series steadily declined for me, and that's okay. And I'm so jealous because the whole time I was reading this, I was like, I want to be, if they make a TV show or a movie like this, I want to play Millie so bad. And then they announced that Sydney Sweeney and Amanda Seyfried are gonna be in the adaptation, and I'm jealous because I want to do it so bad, but whatever, I'm sure they'll be amazing. And I've been told I look like Sydney Sweeney, so maybe that'll just be me living vicariously through her. Then I read The Only One Left by Riley Sager because after reading the Housemaid trilogy, I was like, oh, I'm into thrillers and I would love to read more. So I picked this one up because I remember a lot of people reading it in like 2023 or the beginning of 2024. But I didn't like it. And I know that Riley Sager is like a popular author, so I thought I would, but I just don't like it. I don't know how to explain this one either. Basically, this woman gets a job as a like home health nurse. She's not a nurse, but she's like a home health care person for this woman who has been accused of murdering her entire family like 50 something years ago, or like a long time ago, like 6 years ago. And she's kind of this local legend. She lives alone in this like estate on this like cliffside manor. She's just like a local legend because they accused her of killing her whole family like 60 years ago, but they couldn't like actually prove it. So she gets a job and she kind of has to take this job, and she goes and she works for her and she's taking care of her. But the woman is like mute. She doesn't speak. Basically, like as you would expect, she kind of is slowly trying to like uncover this mystery, and she starts communicating with this woman via like a typewriter and all this stuff. And I just didn't like it because it was kind of like plot twist after plot twist after plot twist, and it was stupid. I didn't like the portrayal of these women, and they were so like surface level. It was just really like unbelievable. It was relied on too many coincidences. Like relying on 1 or 2, sure, but every like piece of this plot and how it kind of worked in the way that it did was way too many coincidences, and just it was fucking stupid, and I hated it. And I hated the plot twist. I thought it was so dumb. I hated it. So I gave this, oh, I actually gave it higher than I thought. I gave it a 3.25. And I think part of why I gave it as high as I did was just because I read it so fast, because I needed to know what happened, because I was so infuriated the whole time. But it wasn't good. My rating system doesn't make any sense. Like literally take it with a grain of salt, because I genuinely just rate things like in the moment and I'm like, whatever. Then I read another thriller. I read Never Lie, also by Frida McFadden. I gave this a 3.75. This one was good, but it wasn't like amazing, but I did like it, and I read it like in one day. It was about this couple. They're going to like look at a house. They're going to look at a house to buy it, and it's like this giant mansion, and it was owned by this woman who like mysteriously disappeared, and then she was like a psychiatrist, I think, and they're there and they get snowed in, and then they find these like tapes of her therapy sessions, and the woman in the story starts listening to them, and then she kind of like slowly starts to put together like how she disappeared and stuff. I thought I had predicted like everything that was gonna happen, and I kind of did, but I didn't also. So it earned points just for surprising me at the end, but it wasn't like super incredible, but it was good, and I would recommend it just like if you want a good like easy thriller. I gave it 3.75 actually. Then I read Carrie by Stephen King. So this is my second ever Stephen King, and I think one of my goals in the new year is I have 2 other Stephen King books and I need to read both of them. This book is good. Obviously, like everyone knows the kind of general plot of Carrie. The book is pretty different from the movie. I will say, like, and I've heard a couple people talk about this recently, which is why I was kind of like compelled to read the book. She in the book is portrayed as being plus size, or like she's described as being chunky and chubby several times, and that's why they dump pig's blood on her, because they call her a pig, and she's never been portrayed that way in any adaptation. I just think that's interesting. I mean, there's not much more I could say than that, but I give it a 4 stars. It was pretty good. It's a little bit harder for me to read just because the format of it is a little strange, but I found that also in the other Stephen King book I've read, and it's pretty short too. I think it's one of his shortest. Okay, moving on to our just like general category. This is just like a miscellaneous thing. So to get out of the way, I did read the Natural series. I didn't know what to put this in, but I read the Natural series. If you don't know what this is, it is a very popular series by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, who also wrote the Inheritance Game series, which I think is more popular, but I have not read that. This is my first Jennifer Lynn Barnes, and I don't know if I'm gonna read the Inheritance Games. I am intrigued, but I've heard this series is better, so I don't know if I will read the Inheritance Games, because I will be chasing the high of the Natural series for the rest of my life. This series is basically like a high school YA version of Criminal Minds. It is so unrealistic and stupid. Like, it's brain rot stupid. It's like these teenagers who have these like, they're like prodigies in different ways, and they're being used by the FBI to solve crimes and like cold cases, and it is the dumbest thing ever, and it makes no sense, and it is so unrealistic. But I swear she put crack in this series because it's addicting, and it's so fast-paced. Like, I literally read them all in like I read the whole series in a week. I just like, I needed more, and I will literally be chasing this series for the rest of my life, and I'm not joking. So there's 4 main novels, and then there's a novella, which I did include like in like as a book because so the first book, The Naturals, I gave 4.5 stars. This is just like our introductory. We're meeting all the characters. We're meeting Cassie, I think is her name. She's kind of like the newest recruit for the Naturals, and she is a natural profiler. And then there's a couple other characters. So there's one guy who he can like naturally read people's emotions. And then there's another girl who she is like a human lie detector. She can lie really easily, and she can also tell if other people are or are not lying. And then there's another girl who is like Spencer Reed. If you've ever seen Criminal Minds, she's just like really smart, and she knows a lot of facts, and she's just like super intelligent. And then there's also another guy who is another profiler as well. So this is the book where we meet all these characters, and it has its own plot and story, and like as all the books do, but then they also like all connect into like this big huge main plot, which I think is really nice. So the first book I gave 4.5 stars. I really liked it. I ate it up. It was so good. And Killer Instinct I didn't like as much, just because there was a little bit too much of like a love triangle going on that I didn't really like, and kind of like the 2 guys like fighting over the girl, and I just thought it was a little silly, but I still gave it a 4 stars. Still really liked. And then we have All In, which was really, really good. I think this was my favorite of the series. I really liked the character, like the main character that we follow. I also thought this was when like the big plot got really juicy and we can kind of see the connections like between the other books and how everything's kind of like working together. So I gave this a 4.5. And then Bad Blood, which is the last book and last like main book in the series, I gave a 4.25. Thought it was good. Thought the whole series kind of like concluded in a good way. It was a little unrealistic in terms of like the end of the book. I thought it was a little bit like surreal and just like a little too much suspension of disbelief for me, but it was pretty good. And then there was this novella called 12, which is also attached to the series, which takes place like 5 years later, and it was good. I gave it a 3.5 just because, again, like it's hard for a novella to get more than that just because it's a novella. Like, what can you really do? But it was good, and I love this series and I wish I could reread it. I mean, I can reread it, but I wish I could read it for the first time again. I highly recommend it. I think it's great. My boyfriend got it for me for my birthday and it was so good. It was so good. The next couple of books are going to be ones that Luke had me read. Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. This book is also like really famous. I remember it being really popular on Book Talk in like 2020, 2021, and it's just one I've never picked up but always kind of wanted to, but it just never had. It follows like two best friends and kind of the coming of age novel and them discovering themselves and their friendship and their sexuality and stuff. I ended up giving this a 4.5 just because I thought it was really well written and I just really liked it. There's a second book. I don't know if I'm gonna read it. Luke says that he like hates the second one. He's like, don't read it, it's stupid. I mean, I really liked this book. I thought it was great and I would definitely recommend it. Then my only classic that I read the whole year was Maurice by Ian Forster. I gave this a 3.5. It took me a long time to get into. It's definitely not my favorite classic, but I do think it was like really good and really well written, and I do really want to see the movie. If you don't know what this is like a really famous like queer literature classic following like a main character as he's going to boarding school and growing up, and like the different men in his life that he has kind of gotten really close to and loved, and kind of him, I guess, battling with that really just because that wasn't really accepted at the time. But yeah, I mean, it was really good. I liked it. Then we have The Gay Best Friend. This book is another book Luke had me read, and I went back and forth with my rating for this just because the main character is so insufferable and annoying and like a horrible person that I was like, I do not know what to rate this because I was so angry at him the entire time. Basically, I can't remember what the main character's name is. I think it's Dominic, but he is the best friend of this couple. So he's really good friends with both the guy and the girl in this couple, and they're getting married, and he is separately invited to both of their bachelorette and bachelor parties. And he manages to cause so much drama and almost break up this marriage and this engagement. It's just like the whole book is just like gossip and drama, so if you're into that, it is very entertaining, and I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. But it's so insufferable and annoying because he is a horrible person. He makes everything about himself. Both trips he makes all about himself, and I just thought he was a horrible person. But I gave it a 4 stars. But when I finished it and I like talked to Luke about it, I remember being like, I want to give this a 2 stars because he was so annoying. And then I like sat on it a little bit and I was like, okay, but it was like really entertaining and I did have a great time reading it, but I was just angry the whole time. It was like watching really shitty reality TV where it's just like you're so angry the whole time because they're so fucking stupid, but it's entertaining, so you're like also having a good time. Then I read Just by Looking at Him. This was one of the last books I read this year. I also gave this a 4 stars. This is also a book that Luke had me read. This also follows another really insufferable main character, but insufferable in a different way. I mean, I guess not insufferable, but just like a kind of complex main character. You really can't root for him the whole time because he's making some really bad decisions. This follows a gay man living in Los Angeles who is a writer for television, and he also has cerebral palsy, and he's been physically disabled his entire life. He's in a committed relationship, and he ends up having an affair with a sex worker, which is a horrible thing to do, and he knows it is. And it just kind of follows like him, I guess, discovering himself and discovering who he is outside of his disability and his relationship and his work life. And I mean, this is also a character who like very clearly hates himself and has a very toxic lifestyle for a multitude of reasons. He's also like an alcoholic, and it's just like, it's a mess. And it's like, when I said he's an insufferable character, he's not insufferable. You're still rooting for him. Like, I wanted him to make the right choice and get better and like stop doing stupid things, but he was making so many bad decisions and so many mistakes that it was really like hard to read, just because it was like, oh my god. But I liked it, and it was entertaining, and I did think it was really well written. I will say though, I listened to half of this on audio, and I think the author narrated the book, and it was so annoying because he was just like, this is like an actor thing, but he was like, he would talk and then he would like get really quiet like this, and he would be talking like, and then he'd be, and it was so annoying. It's like, I don't understand what you're saying, like speak up. But yeah, but it was great, and I hope you guys are doing well. No hate to him. Then I read another one of my favorite books, Tom Lake by Anne Patchett. This was a 5-star read, one of my favorite books of the year. This book was so beautifully written. I absolutely loved it. If they make a movie out of this, I really hope I get a chance to audition, because it was so good. This follows this woman who is talking about her life when she was much younger. She talks about being a teenager through like her mid to late 20s, and kind of her journey of being an actor, and specifically with this play, Our Town. I don't know if you're familiar, very famous play. How she kind of like falls in love with this guy. Well, it's talking about this like romance that she had with this one guy who then went on to be a really famous actor, and she's telling this story to her adult daughters like in 2020 when like the world shut down. And usually I don't like media that is about 2020 just because I don't want to read it because I lived it, but it was really good, and it went back and forth between like present and then, and just like the writing was so beautiful. It was so good, and it just made me so happy to read, and it was just so like calming, and it was so good. It was so good, and I would really recommend it. 5-star read, one of my favorite reads of the year. I've never read any other Anne Patchett, and I don't know if her other work is as good or as famous, but it was really good, and I really loved it. Okay, then this is really random, really quite the switch, but I read Heartstopper Volume 5. I gave this a 4.5 stars. Loved it. It was just time for me to read it. I would like to reread the other books as well, but because it's just been a while. But yeah, it was good. I just needed to read it. And yeah, I don't really know what to say other than that. If you haven't read Heartstopper, I recommend it. There is a TV show. I have never watched it. I don't really watch that much TV, but I've heard great things about it. And I love Kit Connor. That's all I'm going to say about that. So then I read Big Swiss by Jen Bijan, I think is how you say her name. This was a 4.5 star read for me. It was really good. This is another book Luke recommended. Another like instance of an insufferable main character that's just annoying and making bad decisions, but you're still like rooting for her to like do the right thing. Basically, this follows this woman who, her job is, I don't know what the title for it is actually, but basically she listens to audio recordings of this man who's a therapist, and she transcribes the sessions digitally. She's like in this town, this is a new town, and
she's kind of starting her life over. So she doesn't know these people, so she thinks it's like gonna be fine because she doesn't know them, and she technically doesn't know their name. She just knows them by initial, but she gets to like hear all these people's stories, and then she kind of goes out in public and she can like hear their voices and recognize them. And there ends up being a particular woman who's going to these therapy sessions who she kind of in her head like becomes obsessed with, and she, for whatever reason, she calls her Big Swiss. Like she like attaches that nickname. That's not her name, but she attaches that nickname to her, and she's just like infatuated by her and her story and her voice, and doesn't know what she looks like, doesn't know anything about her other than from her therapy sessions. And then one day she ends up meeting a woman, and she associates her voice with this voice in her head of this woman that she's been listening to for months, and she realizes it's this person. And without telling her that, oh, I know who you are because of my job, and explaining what it is, she ends up forming this friendship slash relationship slash affair with this woman, and who does not know that she's also like listening in on her therapy sessions. It's kind of crazy. It's entertaining. I don't know what to say other than that. She's obviously like doing a horrible thing, but you're like rooting for her too, because you're like, it's complicated, you know? That's really all I can say. Okay, then I read Tales from the Cafe. This is the second book in the Before the Coffee Gets Cold series. It's cute. I gave it like a 3.75 just because it's like nostalgic, bittersweet kind of stories. Like they're just like a collection of stories that are kind of interconnected. But it had been a while since I'd read Before the Coffee Gets Cold, so I didn't remember some things. Some of the names are also a little bit confusing because some of them are really similar, which that's my bad. It's not like the author's fault or anything. I just got a little bit confused and a little bit lost, but it is good, and I think that it would be nice to continue the series just because they are like really easy, short reads, and they are like generally pretty good. But I definitely liked Before the Coffee Gets Cold more than this one. Then I read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is my first ever R.F. Kuang book. I gave this a 4 stars. This is really good. It follows a woman who is a struggling author, and she is kind of like friends slash frenemies with this author who is very, very famous and successful and has had several like really amazing books that have done really well. And she's hanging out with this woman, and the successful author, she ends up like choking and dying. The woman that we're following goes into her her little study, and takes her manuscript that like no one else knows about except for her, because the author's like very private, like did not share her stories before they were like ready. So she goes and steals her manuscript and then publishes it as her own. The reason it's called Yellowface is because the author that dies, she I can't remember if she's Chinese or if she's like what like her specific ethnicity is, but she is Asian, and the author that steals her work is white, and the book is about like Chinese labor camps, so that's why I think that she might be Chinese, but I can't quite remember. She steals her work, and then it's you know, it kind of follows that and her guilt, but then also her justifying it. It kind of is a commentary on the publishing industry, and then also white authors appropriating work, using the oppression of minority groups in their work and making a profit off of it. And also kind of like I don't think the term would be blackfishing because it's talking about an Asian woman, but an Asian work, but it does talk about how like she kind of like she has these headshots done that make her look a little more tan, and she changes her name to make she slightly modifies these things in her life that kind of make it look like she could be Asian, and so that people are led to believe that she may have like some Asian like ethnicity, like she could be mixed. And it's just like, I mean, it's a really interesting kind of commentary on that, and I think that that's a really unique perspective. So I really liked it. I've never read any other R.F. Kuang's. I know like Poppy War is a really big one that a lot of people recommend, and I do need to read that, and it is on my list. Babel is also like really popular. I also know she announced recently another book, but I can't remember what it is or what it's about, but I liked her writing style on this, and I know this book is like kind of hit or miss. I've heard mixed reviews about it, but I personally enjoyed it, so that's kind of my 2 cents about it. And then the last book I read this year was Circe by Madeline Miller. I give this a 4 stars. This follows Circe, obviously. If you don't know who Circe is, she is in the Odyssey, and she's kind of like a minor character in Odysseus's story, but it follows her and like her whole life, and it is beautiful. And Madeline Miller is also who wrote the Song of Achilles. I read that back in 2020, 2021, I think, and I didn't love it. Like, it was like a fan favorite at the time, especially, and I did like it. Like, I think I gave it a 3.5 stars, but it didn't make me cry or anything. And so I was a little nervous going into this book, but I did really like it, and I gave it a 4 stars. And I'm interested to see what, I know Madeline Miller has planned an Hades and Persephone retelling, which I'm very interested in, very excited about. That's probably gonna take years to come out, which is fine. Okay, that was all of the books I read in 2024. It was 67 books. I've been talking for 1 hour and 48 minutes, and my voice is a little tired, and I'm ready to go to bed. But thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm gonna try and be more consistent on this channel. That's one of my resolutions for the year, is to consistently post and kind of, you know, try to maintain something. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye!